Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast, Season 5. This podcast is for and about people getting ready for their first ever pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, France, and Portugal. With your host, Camino guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. In the last session, we took the time to acknowledge and write down our successes and accomplishments for the year. Hello again, this is Nancy, and I am still basking in my list of accomplishments and successes for 2024. I hope you are too. One of my accomplishments for this year happened just this past weekend when I had the honor and pleasure of speaking at a Camino event in San Francisco. My topic was, why walk the Camino? I shared a bit about my own story of why I walked the Camino for the first time in 2005, and then why I went back again 2 years later. Of course, you know the story didn't end there, as I've been going back every year since then, sometimes twice a year, and I've been leading groups from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on the Francés route since 2013. Walking the Camino in 2005 and 2007 have been two of my greatest accomplishments. Yes, because it was a huge accomplishment walking nearly 800 kilometers across northern Spain. But the real success came by way of the inner journey, the mental and emotional journey, in that I didn't quit when it got hard, in that I finished what I started, because I recognized and honored how important it was to me, in that I put my introverted self out there in ways I hadn't before. Whenever I meet someone on the Camino and they learn it's not my first time, the first question I get is, how many times have you done it? Honestly, I don't know. I stopped counting in 2012. So when you and I meet in person, whether that is on the Camino or around town in the U.S., instead of asking me how many times I've walked the Camino, I want to invite you to ask me a different question. Ask me why. Why did I walk that first time? Why did I go back again 2 years later? Why did I keep going back year after year? And why do I lead groups of first-time pilgrims on the Camino Francés? The question of why is such a rich one, and I encourage you to ask yourself that question frequently, because I bet your answer will evolve and change over time. And then, after you walk the Camino, when you look back over your journey and the accomplishment, you may discover a different answer yet again. Why are you walking the Camino de Santiago? Oh my goodness, we could talk for hours. But we have work to do, and 2024 is winding down quickly. So we need to get back to our year-end practice. So last two things before we move on to step number 2 of the practice. First, I want to remind you that if you would like some expert support getting ready for your pilgrimage on the Camino Francés, stop by my website, thecaminoexperience.com. There you will discover that I'm currently taking 20% off my Camino Francés Getting Started audio guide, and that's through Boxing Day, December 26, 2024. And I'm working on filling the final spaces in my 2025 Camino Experience groups. I would love to share in your Camino journey. And second, another reminder. This process, this year-end process, can be done at any time, not just at the end of the year. You can do it at the end of a big project as you're moving on to another project. You can do it at your birthday each year, or even at your favorite holiday, just in case your favorite holiday isn't the same as mine. That's right, my favorite holiday is New Year's. Okay, let's go on to step number 2. But first, if you haven't yet done step number 1, I encourage you to stop and go back to the last episode of the podcast and complete your list of accomplishments. I want you to have a solid, positive foundation from which to start this next step. I want you to have fresh in your mind all the good things that happened this year, because now we are going to look at what you are not so happy with. This week, you're going to list your regrets and disappointments. Before I get going, let me emphasize that this step is not about beating yourself up or dragging yourself through the mud or finding fault with who you are as a human being. If you are prone to self-criticism, I invite you to imagine yourself setting down whatever you usually use to beat yourself up with. The frying pan, the baseball bat, the mean words. Agreed? Okay, let's dive into this. I see regrets and disappointments as falling into two main categories, those within our control and those outside of our control. For example, if your area was hit by a natural disaster, that would be a big disappointment for the year, but it wasn't something you could have controlled. If, however, during a rainstorm, you left the top down on your convertible and the interior got ruined, that would be a regret that was within your control. Here's another example. If someone dear to you passed away this year, it's likely that that wasn't something you could have changed. On the other hand, if you feel you didn't spend enough time with the people you love this year, that is something you could have impacted. When you list your regrets and disappointments, look for things in both categories, those within your control and those outside your control. For the things within your control, focus on what didn't work, what didn't serve you, what you wish had gone differently. Again, this is not about beating yourself up. Instead, try to bring some compassion to the process. If it helps, imagine you are objectively reviewing the year for someone you love. Try to step outside yourself and look in from 20 feet away. If you were someone observing you, what would you see? I'll be honest, I've had years when all I could find were regrets and disappointments. And other years, like this last one, when my list of regrets and disappointments is pretty short. This year, my biggest regret is not dealing with my storage unit sooner. You may remember what I mentioned in the last episode, that my storage facility has had a little problem with rodents. Okay, not so little problem. Well, the first signs of that were in July this year. And here we are in December, and I'm finally going through everything, cleaning up the mess and moving to a new storage facility. Perhaps if I had moved out back in July, this wouldn't have become such a nightmare. But of course, other things took priority, and here we are. Sometimes when I'm making my list of regrets and disappointments, I come across accomplishments I missed. For example, I mentioned that I had other priorities this year. In this case, one of the things I was doing this summer was formalizing the content and materials for my Camino experience groups. I now have that perfectly dialed in, so I am adding that to my accomplishments list. What else might end up on a list of regrets and disappointments? Well, usually on my regret list are times when I said or did the wrong thing in a social situation, when I thought I sounded stupid or arrogant or ignorant, when words came out without my thinking about them. I don't know if anyone else does that, but I do. As I thought through some of those times this week, I realized that in addition to regretting saying or doing the wrong thing, I also regret how I handled some of those situations. And I regret that I was, so hard on myself afterwards. That is also worth noting. Here are some other things that have been on my list in past years. Missed opportunities, like not spending time with friends or family or missing a special event. Relationships I didn't pay enough attention to. Forgotten birthdays or other special occasions. Oh gosh, last year was my brother's 60th birthday, a milestone birthday. And I remembered his birthday, but I didn't remember it was the milestone birthday. I regret that. Some more examples. Anything where I know I could have done better. And of course, the big ones. illnesses, health scares, accidents, financial losses, loss of a loved one. If you haven't already, take out a clean piece of paper and your pen and fold the paper in half the long way and set up the same categories you did for your accomplishments. Or if you did your accomplishments by simply brainstorming, you can do it the same way, brainstorming your regrets and disappointments onto the blank page. I encourage you to take your time with this and pay close attention to when a regret or disappointment, here's the key, uncovers an accomplishment or victory you had either forgotten about or hadn't even known was there. Add those to your accomplishment pages as you go. Now, this can be a bit of a downer, yeah? So I'm going to give you your next step right away. But I do recommend you give this the attention it deserves. Take the time to get all of those regrets and disappointments onto the page. What we're doing is we're separating ourselves from them. We're getting them down so that we can see them for what they were and then build something better for next year. All right, our next step. Hopefully you did take a break and list your regrets and disappointments, but let's go on to the next step. Hopefully this one will be a bit more uplifting. So once you're done listing all your accomplishments, your successes, your wins, and then regrets and disappointments, and then after letting the lists sit for a few days to be sure they are complete, lay them all out on a table and look them over. Pay extra attention to your list of accomplishments. Look through those pages and find your top 3 accomplishments. You get to choose the criteria for what makes them the greatest, by the way. What are you most proud of? What was the most satisfying part of the year? Which of your accomplishments would you like to do again? Maybe exactly the same way, but maybe bigger and better. Circle those accomplishments or write them on a separate piece of paper. For me, I love leading my Camino experience groups. I love that I get to support my pilgrims in getting to the start of their pilgrimage, getting connected to other pilgrims on the trail, and taking their first steps toward Santiago de Compostela. I love bearing witness to all these incredible stories and journeys. And I love meeting my podcast guests and listeners on the trail. I love that I got to help hundreds of pilgrims this year, who I will probably never meet. For a personal win, I'll share one of my favorite examples from 2023. Last year, I got to deliver my dad's ashes to his favorite place on earth, Yosemite. My dad passed away in March 2022 at the age of 91. He worked at Yosemite summers when he was in his 20s, and our family camped there numerous times when I was growing up. I was able to get a permit to scatter his ashes within the park, and I found the perfect place in his favorite part of the park, Tuolumne Meadows. And it's a place that I can return to each year to remember him and honor his life. When I took Dad's ashes to Yosemite, I also added onto the trip a 2-night stay at Lake Tahoe for a birthday week retreat and an overnight stop to visit cousins in Bishop on the eastern side of the Sierra Mountains. Getting Dad back to Yosemite, taking time out to reflect, and reconnecting to my dad's side of the family felt like a big deal to me, so I considered it all one of my top accomplishments for 2023. Once you have found your top 3 or 4 accomplishments or wins for the year, take a moment to let it sink in that you did that. You have done great things, and you will do great things again next year. Take some time to celebrate and perhaps even share your accomplishments with your family and friends. Who knows, you may even inspire them to make their own list of accomplishments. Once you've taken a few moments to bask in the light of your successes, the next step is to look over all of your pages, all the accomplishments and disappointments again. This time, you're looking for lessons and messages. What has this year taught you? What can you conclude from these accomplishments and regrets? What are your takeaways? Do you see any patterns? Can you see where you consistently get tripped up, where you are your own worst enemy? Or do you see where you always triumph, where nothing can bring you down, or where your superpowers always kick in? Make some notes on these observations because we are going to use them in the next episode. When I did this process this year, I noticed that my biggest challenge with my storage unit was that I simply don't like that it exists. I want to get everything out of storage and get back to using and enjoying my stuff. There's a long backstory here, as you might imagine, but the short version is that I will need to move so I can have the space for everything that I'm currently storing. The rub is that I love where I live now, and simultaneously, I want something different. As you go through your list of accomplishments, see if you can also detect your superpower at work. By that I mean, what is the secret of your success? What skill or strength have you been using to make all these wonderful things happen? I noticed that one of my superpowers is having a clear purpose or goal, which in this case is to have my stored items moved to the new facility by December 20th. I am right on track for that because I have the goal. I know what needs to be done and when it needs to be done, and I am laser focused on getting it done. Another example is my top work accomplishment from 2023, which was writing my Camino Francés Getting Started audio guide. The one I mentioned is now 20% off. I knew what I was building. I knew the steps I had to take, and I had a deadline. That is a super helpful insight because I suspect I can transfer that to other areas of my life. Related to that is the observation that what I focus on gets done. Everything else, not so much. Something else that started to become clear to me when I reviewed my list was what I value. One of my highest values is living simply. I think I picked this up by walking the Camino so many times. Specifically, I don't own a lot of stuff, and my small storage unit reflects that. About half of my stored items are practical items, meaning I will use them all once I get them unpacked. And the other half are photos, books, and mementos from my life and travels, all things I treasure. From reviewing my list, I could also see that I value connection and community, and I want more of those things in my life. Specifically, I noticed my social life could use some attention. And the fourth of my top 4 values that I see is generosity of spirit. That is to say, generosity of spirit is the force behind what motivates me to give of my time and financial resources, to produce the podcast, and when I volunteer at my church, and also when I give money to nonprofit organizations. Turns out I notice I also value comfort. Specifically, I love a comfortable couch and a comfortable bed. But if I'm not careful, I can spend too much time in those particular comfort zones. In other words, I noticed a tendency to watch too many movies and too many Facebook reels instead of reading a good book or getting up and exercising. Not good, since I do need to be training to walk the Camino with my group in May next year. Now, why am I calling out my values? Because this is fertile ground in which we are going to build our focus for next year. This is where we will look in the next episode to find what we want for 2025. So after you have found the lessons or messages in your lists, take a look through your lists again and see if you can identify what you obviously value. You may notice or confirm that you value family and relationships, or it could be financial success or fame. Maybe what is most important to you is personal or spiritual growth. It could even be something like kindness or giving. Here are some more values you may have on your list: integrity, honesty, self-care, intelligence, street smarts, generosity, competition, cooperation, compassion, purpose. What do you value? That's your next step, to review your list and pull out your 3 to 5 highest values. We'll spend more time with those next week. Let me wrap up with a quick review of what to look at this week. 1. Write down any and all regrets and disappointments from this year. 2. Review your list of accomplishments and identify your top 3 wins for the year. Write these on a separate piece of paper and set them aside. 3. Review all your lists, looking for lessons and messages from what you accomplished or what you regret. Note these on a separate piece of paper also. 4. Review everything you've written so far and identify your top 3 to 5 values. What is obviously most important to you? And 5. Finish this off with a big self-hug and congratulations, and then go do something nice for yourself. If you've gotten this far, you've done quite a bit of self-reflection, and you deserve to be acknowledged for that. Well done. Okay, that's it for this episode. I'll be back next week with our next step, which is to look ahead to 2025. Wishing you a beautiful week, my friends.